welcome to this video on how to revise for how you have used quotations in your essay. First of all, a few free friendly reminders. Number one, anything that is copied verbatim from an outside source in your paper should be in quotation marks. If you have verbatim information from your source that you haven't put in quotation marks and given a citation at the end, it's plagiarized. Yikes. So you want to be careful to make sure that you haven't accidentally copied word for word. But on the other hand, no more than 10% of your essay should be in quotes. 90% of it should be your own thoughts, digesting the information and presenting the information that you have gathered to make an educated argument. A research paper or an essay should not just be you saying, hey, here's what I found some other people said. So you want to use the quotes only when, number one, you want to establish credibility. Like, for example, according to lead researcher Dr. Who's a Watson at Cornell University, blah, 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 blah. So when you can throw in these types of phrases that say, hey, this quote that I'm pulling, it's coming from somebody who knows what they're talking about. Or if your author says something in such an eloquent way that you can't imagine saying it any other way, go ahead and add the quote. Otherwise, if it's possible to put it in your own words, you should be putting it in your own words. Okay, so let's review. If you're going to quote, there are 4 ways to do it. We called it TIES, which stands for tag, introduce, embed, and split. So if you're going to tag a quote, that's where you're going to put your signal phrase at the end of your quote and add a comma. Conversely, if you're going to introduce a quote, you're just going to have your signal phrase at the beginning and add your comma. If you're going to embed a quote, you may not have a signal phrase at all. If you do, you will be using the word that, like Brinkley says that, and then you would have no comma because the that kind of takes the place of the comma. Sometimes when you embed, you will do as this example does, and you just have little chunks of quote. See? The little chunks of quote that are embedded into your sentence, kind of like a chocolate chip in a cookie. It becomes one with one another. So you just have little nuggets of quote throughout. You don't need commas because you don't necessarily have a signal phrase. And then finally, you can split a quote, which means that your signal phrase comes smack somewhere in the middle. And you would need either commas, or if you're splitting two sentences, you would need a period at the end of one of them, so that it would kind of look like one of them was either a tag or an introduce, but you've got 2 sets of quotation marks in the sentence before and the sentence after. This is just one sentence, so we're just putting a comma around our signal phrase because it interrupts that sentence. Okay, so let's practice. Here's what I need you to do in your paper. I need you to find every single time you have a quote, and I need you to make sure that it is tagged, introduced, embedded, or split. Let's take a look at this quote in a student sample. The quote starts here and ends here. There happens to be a quote within the quote here, which, by the way, should be put in single quotes since it's inside another quote. But is this tagged, introduced, embedded, or split? I hope you figured out it's none of the above. It is never okay just to have an entire sentence that's nothing but quote in your paper. It's awkward. It's like somebody else is suddenly talking out of your mouth and we don't know who it is, as if you are possessed. So you're going to want to make sure to either embed it if you don't necessarily have a so-and-so said phrase, a signal phrase, embed it, or better yet, in this case, there's not really anything special about this quote. Maybe the words probable cause, but the rest of it is completely paraphrasable. So that is what you're going to want to do. All right, let's take a look at this first one. Our student author says, as Gerson says herself, the right to privacy, blah, 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 trespass. Is this tagged, introduced, embedded, or split? I hope you recognize that it is introduced because we have our signal phrase at the beginning. By the way, a few freebies. If you have your author's name in the signal phrase, you do not also need your author's name in the citation. It's not necessarily wrong, it's just somewhat unnecessary. But I want to point out that if you have an entire sentence that's quoted, then you're going to capitalize that sentence just like you would as if it were a sentence all by itself. Okay, let's take a look at the second sentence in this. This is because she views, quote, privacy laws with respect, blah, 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 blah. Is this tagged, introduced, embedded, or split? I hope you recognize that it's embedded because the quote becomes one with the sentence. Now, is this quote necessary to our, like, does it have to be quoted? Maybe. But like I said, if there's any time that you can paraphrase it, it is better off to do so. And then finally, our last example. Is it tagged, introduced, embedded, or split? It says research demonstrated that in the U.S., black workers are blah, 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 all the way to the end of the quote. Tagged, introduced, embedded, or split? I hope you recognize that it is embedded. It is embedded because of one magical word, and that would be the that. If you have a so-and-so said, which in this case is research, so research demonstrated, and then we have our that, then this is embedded. So if you're going to embed a quote and it becomes part of your sentence, you would not have a random capital letter in the middle. Also, to tell you the truth, I think that this one is probably paraphrasable. So there's no reason to have this in quotes. Just say it your own way instead, but at least the way that it is done is embedded correctly. So remember, 90% of the paper should be in your own words. Save those quotes for the special moments where you need to build ethos or credibility, or where there's just some eloquence that you can't seem to let go of. I hope this helps. Look through your paper and paraphrase any quotes that aren't necessary, and make sure that the rest of them are tagged, introduced, embedded, or split.